So my name is Derek Cassese. I am a SE and I live in High Point. I don't typically hail down to Charlotte too much, but I'm covering. We had a little scheduling conflict, but I also bring kind of a unique past career in that I worked at UNCG, so University of North Carolina at Greensboro, for 9 years. So I worked in higher ed for, a very, very long time, and I know it's unique characteristics. And I will say that what we just all saw is very, very impressive, what they're doing here at CPCC. They really have turned over every stone. What's that? Recording? I don't know. Are we recording? Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, we're recording. We are, so you can all replay my wonderful presentation along with everything else today to your heart's content. What I'm going to do is shift gears a little bit, and it was a little bit of a good segue at the end of CPCC where we're talking about hyper-converged. But what if you want to just get out of the data center game altogether, and we're going to talk about moving things, being workloads and architecture, to the cloud, specifically Citrix Cloud, which is our offering that stands alongside the on-prem deployments that you just saw and that have been typically deployed. I'm going to run through this kind of at a really quick pace because we've got a couple other presentations to get in. So if you want to dig in or ask, you can ask questions by all means, but then I'm probably going to get cut off and we can talk after if you want to dig into some of this in more detail. I'm talk about what is Citrix Cloud. I'm going to also talk a little bit about how we work with public clouds like Azure, but obviously we work with any cloud, so you could take the same conversation and do AWS. You could do private clouds, what have you, and then if we still have time, I'm going to go in and show you what this looks like, okay? And I'm not a huge PowerPoint fan, but sometimes you have to use it. So when I do PowerPoint, I like little gadgets, and I've got a new presenter here that allows me to do some interesting highlights. So bear with me here as I use my new toy. Citrix Cloud is not a product. It is a platform. So for just clarification, our core set of technologies is XenApp and XenDesktop, XenMobile, ShareFile. And then NetScaler obviously is what allows everybody to remotely access those features. We have an analogous service for those core products in a cloud environment. And you'll notice at the top left, right, so it says Citrix Architects. This whole area here is now a subscription, similar to logging into AWS or Azure, where you say, I want something, click, here's my credit card, boom, there it is. No more, I've got servers and I'm waiting to get access to them, or rack and stack, or power, the guy bought the wrong power cord, or, all that stuff is gone, right? You instantly have access and you're starting to do your work. On the bottom, you'll notice we've got what we call resource locations. So you have a top-level control plane of these services, and then you get to focus on what's important to the business, which are the apps and the desktops, okay? So I'm going to dig into this a little bit more just to kind of drive home the concepts. Here's a traditional deployment of Citrix. This should look familiar to anybody that's done XenDesktop in the past or have moved to a 7X architecture. You've got basically all, the top part controllers, you've got SQL to worry about, storefront or web interface if you haven't moved. On the bottom, you have your VDAs. The bottom is really why you're doing all this, right? You're trying to give a resource to a user. CPCC is giving desktops to their students. They're giving apps to the students. You don't get in this game to do all the other stuff. It's just a necessary evil, okay? Now, when we get into Citrix Cloud, watch what happens. We siphon off all that necessary evil piece. It's a subscription per user per year, and you start building your environments from that point on. So I'm going to tell a quick story here. The last project I was involved in at UNCG was to build a Citrix environment for computer labs and remote access. And my team was all kind of huddled into a conference room. Yeah, they put us in a conference room, and we're all sitting around this conference table because they were doing Scrum at the time, and it was to try to expedite the building of this project. We were there for 5 months. In 5 months, we got the control plane stood up, okay? Because you have to have redundant delivery controllers. What about SQL? What is storefront? How long do I have to wait for the VMs? The VMs were not spec'd right. 5 months, no joke, okay? When I went and built my first Citrix Cloud environment for a customer, that 5 months was gone. Like, I was starting at that point. And that's when I was like, that's the aha for me with this whole concept. I was like, this is crazy, because now the whole, I like to say time to production. The time to production of leveraging these services is drastically reduced. The other thing is, who would love to not ever have to upgrade an environment? I'm one, right? The upgrades are on us. They're on Citrix. So you just come in, hey, there's new features added. Just like, I'll use a Netflix analogy. All of a sudden, there's a new feature in Netflix, you just consume it. You don't care about it. You just get to use it. Now, from a backwards compatibility perspective, the stuff that you work with down in the bottom, when we do upgrades, the VDAs are always backwards compatible, and you get to upgrade the VDAs when you can. Okay? Now, the key here is the connector. So the connector talks up to the cloud environment. Traditional deployments, you would point your VDAs to the delivery controllers. Well, in a Citrix Cloud environment, you simply point your VDAs to the connector. Connector talks out port 443, and it takes a bunch of roles. So it does authentication, it does the proxying of the ICA session, it also does provisioning, so we can do MCS out of the cloud. Again, you start with Studio, you point it to, you set up your host with your hypervisor, and you're already starting to build these environments out with desktops and apps. Okay? It also does the Active Directory identity feature. So the connector is a very important piece to this architecture, so you deploy them in an HA pair, similar to how you would with a controller. A little bit more. That 5 months, we had some pieces redundant, but not everything. With the Citrix Cloud, the whole backplane, the whole architecture that you're leveraging, fully redundant. SQL is redundant. The servers are redundant. We've partnered with Microsoft that's living in Azure. You know how many data centers that Microsoft has. So it's extremely robust. It scales dramatically. Now, the bottom part, the resource locations, they can be anywhere. So, for me at UNCG, we had 2 data centers. They were logically one because they were fiber connected. But if you have, let's just say you had a remote data center somewhere, you could basically have the remote data center be one resource location, the primary data center be another, and manage it with one Citrix Cloud instance. Now you've got redundancy and you've got HA capabilities. You could use that in a DR. You could also say, well, I'm really trying to get to an Azure and I don't know really how to get there. Well, now you can have everything on-prem and slowly have a couple things up in Azure and see how that feels and control it with one environment. No more do you have 4, 5, 6 different environments. Now, we've been talking about the cloud service on the right, and that's where essentially you pay a Citrix subscription, and you're given a Citrix fully provisioned environment to then go build your apps and desktops. That's the cloud service. We also have always had the ability to host Citrix in Azure and public clouds, where you literally just turn that public cloud into your data center. You're paying IaaS fees to whoever it is you're working with. And we also have the extend capability, and that's where in some early versions of 7, we allowed you to use MCS to put an MCS provisioned pool in, say, Azure, where you basically create that connection in the host section, and you could burst out to Azure. Now, what I like about this slide, because this is what's important, it was important to me when I was at UNCG, and probably to you all, is that I never had any extra time. I always had like 10 things to do in a week, and I would end the week with 13 things to do, right? So that just keeps building up. So this is the same concept, but as you get to the right, you notice the time and labor goes down because it's a subscription, the time to production goes down, and it's much easier to actually get these out to users. I can't tell you how many times I sit with customers and they've got stalled VDI projects because it's just taken so long, and eventually the buy-in starts to drop. The use cases start to get replaced with other things, and it stalls, right? But with these solutions, with cloud, you can really get them out of the door quickly. All right, so that's enough of my PowerPoint. I'm going to go in here and show you what this feels like. I lose the screen. Hold on 1 second. We're missing the screen in the room. Plug it back in. All right, so Citrix Cloud, and I will note that there are a lot of other players in the cloud game, but quite frankly, Citrix owns cloud.com. So, we were kind of the first to get to this point. And essentially, the Citrix Cloud environment, you log in and you have your subscription. And what I'm going to do is take you through what this feels like. So the first thing, remember we talked about resource locations. I'm going to go in here. Resource location is nothing more than where you're going to have your apps and desktops. So I've got two, right? You're seeing one in Azure and you're seeing one in my local lab in High Point, okay? Essentially what that means is now I can provision desktops and apps out of both locations, okay? You may notice that there's two domains in here. There's kind of a footnote. While that's possible, it's not supported right now. They're working on multi-tenant capabilities for multiple domains. The reason I was doing this was for some other demos, but the key here is that, if you have Azure or if you have other locations, you need to actually connect your domain services appropriately, whether it be ExpressRoute or site-to-site VPN, and then everything will play nice from a domain perspective. But the first thing you do is you come in here, you click on this, you download this Windows service, and you install it on a server in your resource location. That's the connector that we just talked about. Once you have that, it pulls out and extracts the domain membership, so you don't have to set anything up. You do that twice for HA purposes. We manage those connectors. So what we do behind the scenes, they call it a canary update process. There's an A and a B. And when we roll out an update, we'll update A, and we'll make sure it comes back up and it's healthy, and then eventually we'll update B. So that at no time are you left with a failed resource location. And that's, again, it's all managed by Citrix Service. Okay, so now you've got the resource locations done. That's step one. Then you come into the apps and desktop service. And this is where, right, now we're starting to get into the actual services. If you remember that first slide, this is one of the services in the Citrix Cloud world. I'm going to go to service creation, and you're going to notice something that looks very, very familiar. And you also notice the way that I'm connecting to it looks very familiar. It's Studio, delivered via the HTML5 receiver in the Citrix Cloud service. Right, so I truly do love the fact that we as Citrites use our technology every day, but we also use it to deliver our service. I don't think there's anybody out there that does that. But again, so think about this. You bought into this service, you sent the POs to whoever, all of a sudden you log in and you're sitting there staring at a Studio with a back end that's already done. Right, I can't tell you how much that's impressive to me, because that was literally 5 months of my life sitting in a conference room. That I could have gotten back. But from this point on, we spent a lot of time in Studio this morning. You're working with Studio the same way you would if it was on-prem. Exactly the same, right? So I have my hosts down here set up, and I remember the first time I did this, I went, surely I can't just type in 192.168.1 blah, whatever my Xen server is, but that's all I did, and it knows because it goes through the connector, communicates, and now I can provision and use MCS. It was that easy. My Azure, you just use your subscription with your unique code, and it can talk to your Azure. You want to have another one, you can set up another one. And these are all based on the resource locations. And I get this question sometimes, so I like to bring it up, but the way that we're doing that is we're leveraging the zones feature. Each resource location is a zone. And that's how the overarching control plane knows how to direct the traffic and how to do registration from VDA from the resource locations up to the cloud. So you've got the environment, you stood everything up, and the next phase is how do you get, the storefront piece, what about NetScaler? And this was another moment where I literally had to kind of laugh at myself. It's a checkbox. Has anybody set up NetScaler Gateway? Who set it up, right? It's a checkbox. Like all the work that goes around setting that up, yeah, I'd like to use it. Now given the hosted one has some caveats, it's about 30 concurrent users per connector, right? Because you're doing the gateway in the cloud and sending it down through the connector to the resources. But again, to check a box and be able to have it all done was pretty impressive. And then they give you this cloud-hosted storefront. So you'll notice what that gives me the ability to do is come to this URL, which is now hitting that cloud-hosted gateway. And I'm logging in with the domain credentials from my local lab resource in High Point, which was one of those resource locations. So when I did this, man, I told you I was kind of blown away. I was like only a couple hours in and I was already at this point. It's that straightforward. Now given and what that means is you're not fighting with the technology. You're able to actually focus on the apps, the desktops? What about data? The things that are really, quite frankly, the most important part here. Okay. So again, this is all the same. This is now cloud-hosted storefront. I got my desktops and my apps like we've seen this morning. And you know, I can go ahead and launch a XenApp delivered desktop, as I like to say. And so while that's launching, the other thing I wanted to show you was real quick, just to drive home a couple things. So this is my Azure subscription. You'll notice I've got 3 servers, right? I've got 2 VDAs in the connector. That's it. I mean, so theoretically, I could only have 1 VDA if I wanted to, but that's the only architecture in that resource location. So that's you think about, you know, if you had everything in there, you'd have the controllers, the SQL, the license, you'd have storefront, you know, all that stuff. Now you'd be paying for that in IaaS, but you also manage it if you were doing it on-prem. So I like to show that just because it's very, very simplistic from a resource location perspective. Okay, so I've got my XenApp server. It's delivered via the Citrix Cloud. And the next phase of this is, all right, what about monitoring and management? Well, we've got Director, part of the service. It's already there, ready to work for you. So I can do my search just like you would with an on-prem environment. Search for my user. And it's going to basically pull up the session. I mean, this is standard. This is just like if you were deploying Director on-prem. Here's my session. Here are my details. I like to pull this up because I struggled with a couple kind of weird oddities at UNCG where some of this data wasn't being pulled because of firewall and AV and whatever. It's all just configured out of the box, shadowing, all just works. And there's some extreme value to not having to haggle with these types of tools, right? So you can get trending. You know, the other nice thing about this is that as we release on a quarterly cycle, new features of Director, they're just there. So you just all of a sudden have a new report that you can leverage. There's no more, all right, we got to upgrade Director. You know, we have a lot of work to do. We have to upgrade the environment. So that, I mean, essentially what I just showed you in the matter of, I don't know how long I've been talking, 10, 15, 20 minutes, that is Citrix Cloud. Citrix Cloud is the alternative where we went down the road of what CPCC is doing. We ended up talking about, all right, what about hyper-converged? But what the other side of that coin for potential, you know, if you want to start getting into a cloud-first mentality or getting out of the data center and doing things faster, is leveraging a Citrix Cloud service. And you don't need to be in Azure or AWS to do this, right? You could start with, let's get the architecture out. Let's start with the service. Then we have the flexibility to now move workloads to an Azure, to an AWS, or to a remote location, but manage it with one overarching control plane. Does that make sense?
That would be a good example. Your version of Citrix controller that you're on right now is what? 7.11. And you've had to, at some point in the last X months, upgrade that, right? In this world, you would never have to upgrade it. It would just always be up to the latest version.
Correct. The upgrade cycles? Yeah. Yeah, and more than likely, you're going to have more than one environment, usually, if you have a test dev, prod. I mean, it's getting out of the game of upgrades is a pretty big deal. And, you know, I got the question also, well, can I tell Citrix not to upgrade? Right? Well, this is a cloud service. So the answer is no, because you can't tell Netflix not to upgrade, right? You can't tell Azure and Microsoft to not add a feature. What we will do is we will make sure that the pieces you're responsible for are backwards compatible, right? And that's just the VDA. I mean, for anybody that's gone from the old 6.5 XenApp world to the new 7X, it's light years ahead of where it used to be. It used to be like the whole thing was installed on every XenApp server. Now it's just a thin VDA agent. And that's the piece that you manage. Or you get, you know, a partner, or there's other ways to do that whole VDA piece. Now, one other key thing here, if you are moving to a Citrix Cloud deployment and you want to start leveraging like a Citrix Cloud, I mean an Azure or an AWS or what have you, those IaaS pieces it's kind of bring your own IaaS, right? It's bring your own infrastructure. So it doesn't include, and this gets a little confused. I have a couple customers that thought it included some of that. Doesn't include putting workloads in Azure or AWS. So that would be an extra piece. So you have to think about the overarching, you know, the whole cost when you look at this. But with this solution, there's no requirement to do that. You can start with the subscription. You can start with everything on-prem. And all you do is just, you could literally, if you have a test environment today, you could spin this up. You can go to onboarding.cloud.com and do a trial. You can spin it up and then just reconfigure a VDA and point it to your connector. And then you can start playing with it. It's that simple.
So take CPC's example, as an example, they're buying Nutanix, which is a cloud-ish type infrastructure on-prem. They could have Citrix in the cloud manage that Nutanix block in one data center and in another data center. They're fully resilient, fully highly available, fully DR ready, fully business continuity ready in that solution. Because you don't have to care about the control plane.
Correct.
Cloud. Their desktops are running on 2 different clusters and 2 different data centers. If one goes away, they've still got desktops in the other. And all you're doing is tying this into the Nutanix cluster.
Yep. And there's always going to be reasons, in my opinion, to have, let's just say you're going down this path and saying, we're going cloud. There's going to be on-prem resources, right? There's going to be AD, there's going to be other pieces, right? And that's where the hyperconverged plays. So it's in my ideal world, right? You have a hyperconverged data center leveraging cloud services where you can, so that we can all do more with less. Because I mean, for me, that's what it was. It was always every year. It was less resources and do more. And that's what that's what these are. And I see a lot of easy buttons in this solution that I wish we had, or I had back 4 or 5 years ago. So I know that was really quick, but this is really just kind of a quick primer just to kind of get you, all right, now you kind of seen Citrix Cloud. I've given a couple webinars that go into much more detail on kind of building some of this stuff out, but they're really, once you get it configured, you're really managing it just like it was on-prem. Any questions? All right. I don't think I see anything on here either. Appreciate it.